you scintillating seekers and beautiful heretics. Welcome back to Idea Checks, where we take an analytical lens to mysticism, spirituality, the esoteric, and phenomena not previously understood. My name is Kiara, the Mad Witch, and I'm really excited to be talking with you today about the healing power of prayer. I don't know why I said that like a Power Ranger supervillain, but that's just the energy we're channeling today. So I'm going to be upfront with you. The evidence for the healing power of prayer is not nearly as compelling as the evidence for other forms of experiments that we have already explored on this channel. So if you've been here before, you may be familiar with the studies on precognition, on remote viewing, on certain forms of mind-matter interaction. And all of these studies, even though they're not acknowledged by the mainstream, there are huge swaths of data that show us that these experiments are very statistically significant. In fact, they've exceeded what's called the 6 sigma threshold. And the 6 sigma threshold is when an experiment is calculated at odds against chance of 1 billion to 1. In other words, it's no chance, their chance. Prayer, on the other hand, not as compelling. And we're going to get into all of that. Part of it is that it's not the easiest thing to study. There's a lot of really impressive anecdotal stories, and you may have heard stories of people who, they're on death's doorstep and they have a mystical or transcendent experience, and all of a sudden the cancer is in remission, right? I was actually just reading the other day in a non-woo-woo book. It's called Art of the Impossible by Stephen Kotler. He's a flow researcher and a science writer, and he was telling this story about how he alleviated his Lyme disease. It had basically incapacitated him, and through the flow state, through the mystical state that he was having while surfing, he was actually able to become a functional human being again. And so there's lots of those stories out there that, make you raise an eyebrow. But is it possible to study in a laboratory? Well, it's possible, but it's not easy, and that's what we're going to get into today. Why am I still winking? Stop winking. I think sometimes I think I'm winking and I just blink because I wink with both eyes. One of the more successful studies was conducted by Miss Elizabeth Targ. And yes, that is the daughter of the Stargate wizard Russell Targ, who we have talked about before. He was a linchpin in the whole Stargate, CIA, remote viewing, super psychic Russian spies, that whole story. If you don't know, maybe check it out later. It's pretty interesting. I digress. Elizabeth Targ conducted a study on the healing potential of prayer on patients with advanced AIDS. AIDS, go away. Come back on another day. Come back never. They ran this experiment twice, and basically what they did is they took a group of men, divided it into 2, and had a control group and the treatment group. And so these men who all had advanced AIDS, half of them were receiving no secret healing treatment, and the other were being sent healing intentions by a group of master healers. Now, in the pilot study, what's interesting is that 4 of the control subjects died, and everyone in the treatment group survived. However, this could have been due to the distribution of age across the groups, and so they did a replication study 6 months later. I will read you the excerpt from the Reality of ESP. In the study, 40 men with AIDS were again recruited from the San Francisco Bay Area. They were told that they had a 50-50 chance of being in the treatment group or the control group. All subjects were carefully pair-matched for age, CD4 count, and AIDS-defining diseases. 40 distant healers from all parts of the country took part in the study. Each of them had more than 10 years' experience in their particular form of healing. They were from Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Native American, and shamanic traditions, in addition to secular bioenergetic schools. Each patient in the healing group was treated by a total of 10 different healers on a rotating healing schedule. Healers were asked to work on their assigned subjects for approximately 1 hour per day for 6 consecutive days, with instructions to direct an intention of healing and well-being to the subject which they were attending. None of the 40 subjects in the study ever met the healers, nor did they or the experimenters know into which group anyone had been randomized. In other words, the experiment design was double-blind and randomized. So what's interesting about this is that by the end of the study, the treatment group was actually able to identify itself because it had way fewer opportunistic illnesses. They had better medical and quality of life outcomes at odds of 100 to 1 against chance, which is pretty minor, but you can still, it's still a stat that they throw out. Fewer outpatient doctor visits, 185 in the treatment group versus 260 in the control group. Fewer days of hospitalization, 10 versus 68. less severe illnesses acquired during the study, 16 versus 43, and significantly less emotional distress. This remains one of the most successful prayer healing studies ever conducted, and other people have tried. I think a really important example is a study that came out of Duke University, which is a big deal, right? Duke University, like, of course they get millions of dollars in funding for this and a ton of press, like everyone, it's going to be everywhere, right? In all the major magazines and outlets. For some reason, the lead researcher in this experiment, this scientist, decides that they're not going to use master healers. They're not going to use experienced healers. Instead, they're going to use self-selected members from his own church, from his own congregation. I can't even say that word. Why did this dude insist on using members of his own church? All he said was that the medical model requires universality of application. But like, look, bitch, if I need a haircut, I'm not gonna go to the dog groomer. Welcome to PetSmart. How can I help you? Can you give me like a cute, edgy bob? I can do a poodle cut. And so this being Duke University, of course it makes it into the mainstream news. And of course people see it and they're like, of course that doesn't work. You can't heal people with your mind. And they might be right. Okay, they might be right. But it's one of those things where like, there's something, it seems like there's something there enough that it would be worthy of investigation. But we also can't seem to replicate it consistently enough that we can prove it. And that kind of begs the question, why does this work sometimes and other times it doesn't? And to answer that question, I think we're going to wrap up with a couple of ideas from Greg Braden about why prayer works. And if you're not familiar, Greg Braden is an author who does a lot of that, like bridging between spirituality and science. He writes a lot about the effect that our minds and our emotions have on the world around us. So a lot like the law of attraction, but he doesn't usually talk about it in those terms. He talks about it in terms of like the divine matrix and the wisdom codes. And yeah, his work is great. But there is an idea that he puts forward in the wisdom codes that I think is really interesting, which is that in the West, when we pray, we say something and we think that the words are the prayer. But words are for humans. Okay, the language of the universe is emotion.
Emotional, damn it!
So when Greg was on a trip to Tibet, just hanging out with the monks in the Himalayas, I'm so jealous, that's so cool. He asked the abbot, he was like, when we see you praying for 12, 14, 16 hours a day, what is happening inside of you? You have never seen our prayers, answered the abbot, because a prayer cannot be seen. Adjusting the heavy wool robes beneath his feet, the abbot continued, what you have seen is what we do to create the feeling in our bodies. The feeling is the prayer, and the words create the feeling. In other words, it's not the words that make the prayer, it is the emotion that those words instigate. Same idea with affirmations, right? It's very much like the law of attraction. This idea that we shape the world around us through the vibrations we hold within us, that we influence mind with matter. And what I find so interesting is you have people like Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza who talk about it in the form of like prayer, right? And then you have another group of people who talk about it in terms of manifesting what you want into your life, right? We have the whole like Loa niche that exists, particularly on the internet, but you've got like the Abraham Hicks stuff and the like. What I find so interesting about this is that they are essentially the same thing, right? Except prayer traditionally has been putting ourselves at the mercy of something else, right? Like, please God, lend me a hand here. On the law of attraction, like internet style of doing things, it's very much you are in control of your destiny. You have utter control of your reality. I personally think the truth lies somewhere more in the middle between the way that, religions have taught us and the way that New Age culture is sort of implicating. And so perhaps the answer to the question of life is to make your life a moving prayer. But that's Idea Sex for another time. Thank you for tumbling down the rabbit hole with me today. Thanks for the idea, Sex. Would love to know if you have any direct experience with prayer, if someone has ever prayed for you and you felt it made a difference, or vice versa. And in any case, hail to the power in the sight. Until next time, I hope you stay very, very blessed, my friends. I'm not even cutting, Shiva. I'm sorry, I can't. Normally, I stop and start to make it easier for you, and I'm just gonna lose on camera, and you can figure it out.